Hello students, in this video lecture we are going to discuss about the concept of virtual memory. First, what are the benefits of virtual memory? The first and the most important benefit of virtual memory is that it removes the constraint that processors needs to be completely loaded into the main memory. So before the advent of virtual memory, if a process has to be executed, then it has to be entirely brought into the memory. Only then it can be executed. But when the virtual memory has been introduced, it is no longer necessary that you have to load all the processes fully into the main memory. You can even execute processes which are partially loaded into the main memory. And as a result of this, we also have the advantage that we can even execute processes which cannot be accommodated into the main memory. So some processes may be much larger than the capacity of the main memory. So even those processes can be now executed because we only need to load part of the processes into main memory. So large processes can be accommodated, and similarly more number of processes can also be executed. So all these are benefits of the virtual memory. So basically virtual memory creates an abstraction of the main memory to look like a much large main memory. So it creates an illusion that the main memory has been enlarged to become a larger main memory, and creating a separation between logical memory and physical memory. So without virtual memory, we only have to deal with the physical memory. But when you have virtual memory, the memory has been differentiated as logical memory and physical memory. Logical memory is memory perceived by the processors. So as for the processors, there is a much larger space for them to reside. Whereas physical memory is the actual main memory. So this mapping between logical memory and physical memory is taken care by the operating system. And this particular technique of virtual memory frees the programmers from developing their programs keeping in mind the amount of main memory. So they no longer need to worry about how much memory is available for them to write the programs. They can write programs of any size and they are going to be executed successfully. Virtual memory also allows processors to share files easily. So we have already seen that paging is a concept that is generally associated with the virtual memory. So and in that we have also seen that it's much easier to share pages among many processes. So sharing is easier, and similarly we have also discussed about the concept of shared memory based inter-process communication, and all that gets benefited from the concept of virtual memory. And virtual memory is though it is very advantageous, it is not that easier to implement. It requires a lot of meticulous planning, and it has to be done precisely, otherwise it will become counterproductive. That is, instead of improving the performance, it will become a bottleneck in the performance. So virtual memory has to be implemented in a perfect way so that it will give lot of benefits to the operating system. Now the basic mechanism is just this, that you have a main memory which is of a particular size. Let's say it's 3 GB or 4 GB, and your system has got more processes to run. So the 4 GB of memory is insufficient in most of the cases, unless you are just doing one task at a time. You are generally going to require more memory, especially when you play games and watch movies, multimedia files. Your main memory capacity is going to be insufficient. So by the time, what we can do for enlarging them or increasing them is that option 1 is physically increasing the main memory. That is, you just purchase an additional main memory chip and add it into the system. And the second and the inexpensive option is temporarily extending the main memory by the concept of virtual memory. So here what happens is that a portion of the secondary memory, that is your hard disk, is designated as virtual memory, and it is combined with the main memory virtually. So virtually your disk gets merged with the physical memory and it becomes a single large main memory, and that's what we refer as logical memory or virtual memory. Now we are going to discuss about the background of the virtual memory. So what led to the need of virtual memory? The basic constraint that you have to load an instruction into main memory to execute is a mandatory requirement. Remember that we have only relieved the requirement that processes need not be loaded entirely into the main memory. So at the process level we can partially load processes, but at the instruction level, if an instruction has to be executed, then it has to be present in the main memory. So there is no way that we can execute an instruction which is partially in the main memory. So it has to be completely brought into the main memory. And as a result, this limits the size of program to the size of physical memory. And the first approach that was developed for meeting this requirement is that you have to load the actual process into the physical memory. So somehow you have to find necessary address space and load processes into the main memory. That was the initial condition before virtual memory. So every process gets entirely loaded into the main memory. And then there is a slight improvement happened with the concept of dynamic loading. We have discussed that the dynamic loading is a technique by which the addressing can be mapped dynamically. So a process can be moved from one address space to another address space at runtime, especially when you have the concept of swapping. So swapping is a concept where a process may be swapped out of main memory into the disk and may be swapped in later. So if that happens, then the process may lose the previous address space when it is loaded again into the main memory. So by the time its execution will be affected, all the addresses are bound to the previous address range, and now they become invalid. But dynamic loading removes that condition that every time a process is loaded, its addresses are recalculated. So this provides some improvement in the situation, but not sufficient improvement. An examination of programs shows that we don't actually need entire programs to be loaded into the main memory because of these conditions. Number one, programs have a lot of error conditions, like we have the exception handling code. So those coding are only executed if the actual error happens, and most of the time the errors don't happen. So those code are unnecessarily loaded into the memory. And similarly, we always create arrays list tables of more than the actual size. So our arrays are generally half full, or only 75% of the arrays are fully occupied. So there is the excess memory always allocated, and some options and features are not always required. So basically what we understand by analyzing the programs is that it is waste of memory to load programs entirely or fully into the main memory, and this is what leads to the thinking of virtual memory, where you can load programs partially into the main memory and still execute them. So the ability to execute a program that is partially in main memory has got these advantages. One is, a program would no longer be constrained by the amount of physical memory. We have already seen that I can even load a large program which is larger than the physical memory. And secondly, we can load more programs into main memory. Because you are going to load every program only partially, you can increase the number of programs that can be loaded into the main memory, which improves the CPU utilization. And it is going to need less I/O, because you are going to copy small portions of processes into the main memory from the disk. Remember that moving content from disk into main memory is also an I/O activity. It is also a slow activity, and if you are able to reduce that, then it's going to improve the performance of the computer. So this is also an advantage. And so the virtual memory involves the separation of logical memory from physical memory. We have elaborately discussed how this works under paging. We create a logical memory space with the help of pages, and then they are mapped to physical memory with the help of page table. The virtual address space of a process refers to the logical view of how a process is stored in memory, whereas the physical memory is actually organized in terms of page frames. So page frames are the actual partitioning of the main memory, and the advantage of this concept is that the frames need not be contiguous. So you can load pages in non-contiguous frames. As long as there is a page table to map them, there is no issue with loading pages into non-contiguous frames. There is a term called holes. I will discuss about that in the next slide. So whenever we have virtual memory address space contains holes, they are known as sparse address spaces. And we have also seen that the responsibility of mapping logical address into physical address or virtual address into physical address is given to the memory management unit. So it is the memory management unit which has to handle the process of converting physical address, logical address into physical address, and for that it may make use of page table or segment table depending upon the memory management technique. It could use some kind of a tool for that, and this is how it appears. So what happens is that at the virtual level you have a single large main memory. So this is the perception of the processors, that there is a single large main memory, but physically it has been separated into a disk and a physical memory. So there is a smaller physical memory and a portion of disk. So the combination of this makes the virtual memory to be larger, and then there is a mapping mechanism in between, placed in between the virtual memory and the physical arrangement, and this is what we referred as a hole. So what happens here is that at the logical memory space or the virtual address space, every process comprises of some amount of memory for the stack, some amount of memory for the heap, data and code. In between the stack and heap there is a space provided, or this is referred as a hole. The purpose of this particular space is that the heap may not remain static, it may grow. When it will grow, first let us understand what is going to be held in the heap. The heap memory is generally used for dynamic memory allocation. So whenever programs involve dynamic memory allocation, the memories are all given from the heap, malloc or new function, it is from the heap. Whereas stack is the one that comprises of the local variables and the function arguments, parameters. So both of them may grow at a runtime. So in that case there is a additional space provided, and that is what we referred as a hole. And this space need not be physical, it can be logical. So only when an actual increase happens either at the heap or at the stack, then the memory will be allocated to the process, otherwise it will just be given as a virtual memory. That is again an advantage of the concept of virtual memory. So that is what referred as a sparse address space. So the virtual address space that comprises of the whole is referred as a sparse address space. And this also has the advantage of loading the dynamic link libraries at runtime. So we know that some libraries are combined with the programs at a compile time. For example, C++ makes use of static linking. In that case, any library function that has been referred by the program has to be associated with the program at the time of compilation itself. But there are languages like Visual Basic where dynamic linking is permitted. So here the library functions are not linked to the programs during compilation, but during the actual execution, and that also happens with the help of the holes. So this space, additional space, can be used to hold the libraries at runtime. And we have seen that page sharing is benefited from the virtual memory concept. So this leads to the following benefits. Number one, system libraries can be shared by several processes through mapping of shared object. We have seen that the advantage of dynamic link libraries is that a single function can be shared by many processes, whereas in C++, If many programs need printf call, then every program must have a copy of the printf function. Whereas in the dynamic linking library based programming languages, if one program makes a call to printf, the printf is loaded once into the main memory, and all other processes that requires the same function, they just simply get linked to the function. So they don't load the same method multiple times. This saves a lot of memory. And virtual memory enables processes to share memory for shared memory based communication, inter-process communication. And virtual memory can allow pages to be shared using fork system call. So we have discussed that fork is a system call for creating child process. Once a child is created, the child will be having a duplicate, or it will be sharing the content of the parent. So in that case also the virtual memory concept is helpful. Now we are moving on to another similar related concept called demand paging. So what do you mean by demand paging? Let's understand how the execution of a program happens that involves the loading of the program from disk into the main memory. Normally the simplest option is to load the entire program into physical memory, but we have already seen that it is waste of memory to load the programs fully into the main memory. So we only need to load some content of the process initially into the main memory. So for example, if you consider a C program, during the commencement of the execution, what is needed is only the main function. So it is only the main function that begins to execute. Only when there are function calls made from the main function, other functions may be needed. So in that way, whenever processes are loaded, we just need to load some content of that particular process, or in terms of paging, some pages of the processes needs to be loaded into the main memory. And this is what is referred to as demand paging. So load pages only if they are demanded. So it's something like the situation that some people, when they go to restaurant, they will order everything that they are going to require on that particular day. So and they all will be supplied, and at the end of it, lot of food will be wasted, because especially when there are children, so they will be initially thinking that they can eat this much of food. At the end of it, they will come to know that only half of the food can actually be consumed. So there is a lot of wastage. But some people are wise that when they go to the restaurant, they will just order one by one. So first they will say item 1, and after completing that, or almost at the end of completing that, they will order for the next item. So they will never order more than what is actually needed. So this is equivalent to demand paging. So don't allocate memory to processes fully at the beginning. Just give them little bit of memory, and when they need additional memory, then give that memory. So pages are loaded only when they are demanded during program's execution. That is the idea of demand paging. And till then the processes are kept in the secondary memory. And we have also seen a similar idea which is equivalent to demand paging, which is swapping. So swapping is whenever the main memory is having less space, or there is a need to load a process into the main memory and there is no space left in the main memory, then some victim process will be selected, and that will be thrown out of the main memory into the disk. The victim process gets swapped out of the main memory, and later it will be swapped in. And demand paging is similar to that, but the difference is that swapping happens at the process level. So entire process is moved in and moved out, but here the swapping happens at the page level. So some pages are replaced. We have discussed page replacement algorithms. So those algorithms work at the page level, not at the process level, and thus that kind of a swapping is called a lazy swapper. So a lazy swapper is actually a page level swapper. It does not swap the entire process. And this is just a pictorial representation of that particular process. Now some of the basic concepts of the swapping. So when a process is to be swapped in, that is to be loaded into the memory, the pager's responsibility is to determine which pages are essential for the execution of the process. It has to have some kind of intelligence to determine which pages are currently needed for execution and avoid loading the other pages, additional excess pages. That's what the essence of the virtual memory and paging. So you don't load all the pages into the main memory. So the pager has to make a intelligent guess about which pages are needed, and as a result not all the pages of a process are present in the main memory, and this needs to be conveyed, and for that we can make use of the valid invalid bit arrangement. So whenever a page is not found in the main memory, it is marked as invalid, and similarly if the page is not part of the process, then also it will be marked as invalid, which means that if a page has been marked as invalid, it has two possibilities. One is the page is either illegal for the process, that it cannot access that particular page memory range, or it is legal but it is not yet loaded into the main memory. So this has to be determined by the memory management unit, whether the page is illegal or it is not present in the main memory. Accordingly, the next step has to be carried out. Whereas when it is marked as valid, that means that that page is both legal and is also available in the main memory. So once the page has been found to be invalid, then it has to be the cause will be determined, whether it is illegal or it is not currently available in the main memory, and if it is not in the main memory, then it has to be brought in. So the pager has a very important role, that if it always guesses properly, then it can execute processes with the sum of the pages alone loaded into the main memory without any page fault. It's something like some students go to examinations only preparing for some important questions. They don't prepare for the entire syllabus, they just prepare for some important questions, and fortunately if all the questions are asked out of those subset of the questions, they will write the exam as if they have prepared the entire syllabus. There won't be any difference in their performance. So in fact they could perform better than those who have prepared elaborately across the syllabus. But on the other hand, unfortunately, if the questions are asked from outside that range of questions, then they will suffer, and that is what happens here also. If all the pages are properly guessed, then the execution will happen as if all the pages are loaded into the main memory, whereas if execution leads to some pages which are not present in the main memory, then it will lead to lot of page faults. And this is how it is implemented. So logical memory, and there are valid, this is a page table which has got the entries of the frame numbers along with the valid invalid bit. So the first thing is, it will check the valid invalid bit. If it is valid, then it will load the address from the page from the respective entry of the page table, else it will conclude that the page is not in the main memory or it is illegal. Now when a page fault occurs, what has to be done? So we know what could cause a page fault. Page fault happens when the needed page is not found in the main memory. So access to a page marked invalid causes a page fault, and then the paging hardware in translating the address through the page table will notice that the invalid bit is set, and it will immediately trap to the operating system. It's a kind of interrupt. So immediately the operating system is contacted, that saying that right now I am in need of a particular page which you have not yet brought into the main memory. And so trap is actually a failure of the operating system to predict the desired page and load that desired page into the main memory. And okay, once a page fault has happened, and these are the steps to be followed. Step 1, check the internal table, that is the PCB, whether the process is making a legal request or illegal request. We have seen the arrangement of the two registers, base and limit register. So with the help of it, whether a given address is within the range of the process or not can be easily determined. So that is determined here. If that is found to be invalid, then the cause of the invalid bit is not that the process page is not loaded into the memory, but it is illegal. So no effort will be made to bring that page into the memory. So it will be, the process will be terminated. This is one step. Next step is, if the reference was invalid, then then the process is terminated. And if it was valid but we have not yet brought in that particular page, then we have to page that page into the main memory. And then that requires a free frame. So we need to find a free frame, and if you don't find, then we know what has to be done: page replacement. So a free frame is identified, and then the disk operation is scheduled so that the page will be brought from the disk into the main memory into the chosen frame. And finally the disk read is complete, and the page also brought into the main memory, and necessary updation happens on the page table. Now the page table will have the valid bit for that particular page along with the frame number. And this particular last step is very important. We will discuss about that later, that once a page fault has happened and the page has been brought into the main memory, then you have to restart the instruction that was executing during the page fault. So it is compulsory that in the middle of an instruction's execution, when a page fault happens, you also have to restart that particular instruction, which is going to take some additional time. So this has to be addressed separately. We will discuss it later. And so another modification of the demand paging is called pure demand paging. So the difference is that pure demand paging is more intense implementation of demand paging. So under demand paging, some frames are allocated to every process. Some minimum number of frames are allocated to all the processes. Only beyond that, if there is a need, then page fault will happen. But with the pure demand paging, no page gets loaded into the main memory. So the process keeps making page fault. So as soon as the execution commences, the program counter will be pointing to an address which is not in the main memory. So a page fault will happen. And after that, the next instruction will also be brought in only only as a result of a page fault. So this is the idea of pure demand paging. So don't bring any page unless it has been page faulted. That is the idea. So there is a very useful concept which is helpful for determining which pages are essential for the execution of a process. I told you earlier that the pager must have the intelligence of determining which pages are initially needed for the execution of a process, so that the amount of page faults will be minimized. And an useful concept to make that decision is locality of reference. See, let me just give you an example to understand this. Say for example, somebody is living in Tanjavur, okay? So somebody is living in Tanjavur. In that case, theoretically he can be going around anywhere in the nook and corner of the city. But practically every person goes to some locations frequently. So for example, if that guy needs to be located for some emergency reason by the family members, they don't need to search for him everywhere. They just need to search for some locations where he generally goes. So that limited or restricted location is what we refer as locality of reference. So now coming to programming, even with the programs, theoretically the execution may happen anywhere. That is, if a program starts to execute, the next instruction may be somewhere else, and the next instruction after that may be somewhere else. So in that way, theoretically the execution may jump around within the program, but practically execution happens in a sequence. So after the first instruction, the next instruction is executed, and it goes on like that. And then there may be a deviation, like when there is a function call or when there is a conditional statement, there are going to be some deviation in the order of execution. But in general, the order of execution will be preserved in sequence. And another reason that justifies this is that the role of loop statements and the arrays. So whenever we use loop statements, the same statements are repeated multiple times. So if you load the entire set of loop statements into the main memory, for some period of time there won't be any page fault. Similarly, when an array is being manipulated, you can bring the entire array into the main memory. So during the manipulation of the array, no page fault will happen. So this concept of locality of reference is helpful in determining which pages are necessary for the execution of processes. Now we are going to that particular issue I mentioned earlier. What happens when you have to restart an execution? So restarting happens when a page fault occurs. So whenever a page fault occurs in the middle of an instruction execution, that instruction has to be restarted. But this has a problem, this has a drawback. That's what is going to be discussed. So in most cases this requirement is easy to meet, that is you can just restart an instruction. But if the page fault occurs on the instruction fetch, then we can restart by fetching the instruction. Whereas if the page fault occurs during the fetching of the operand, then we can fetch the operand. So it's not going to be very expensive. You either have to restart the instruction fetch or you have to restart the operand fetch. These two are simple cases where you can accomplish it very easily. But there are some worst cases like this one. Here what we see is that an instruction involves three address access. That is add instruction which has to add the value of A with B. And after that the result has to be placed in C. So A is one address, B is another address, C is another address. And here the steps will be like this. First you have to fetch the add instruction and decode that instruction, step 1. And after that you have to fetch the first operand from A. Then you have to fetch the second operand from B. Then you have to perform the addition of A and B. And finally you have to store the result in C. Now imagine that the page fault happens in the last step. That is, at the time of storing the result into C, the page fault happens. So now what happens is that all the activity that was completed so far will be wasted. That you have to refetch the instruction, decode the instruction again, fetch the operands again, and then you can complete the instruction. So this will waste the time of the CPU. And another problem is that sometimes it may not be possible to restart. So if the instruction involves some partial modification and the partial modification is already completed, then it is irreversible. So that is also another possibility. And similarly, if the source and destination blocks overlap and if the source has already been modified, then you can't reverse because you have modified the content. For example, you have done something like A++. So after that you have lost the current value of A. So similarly, some irreversible action may be carried out, and in that case restarting the instruction is simply not possible. Now what are the solutions? One solution is you try to determine whether all the for example in the given instruction fetching of adding of A and B and storing the result in C, before executing the instruction you check whether all that is needed for the execution is already present in the main memory. That is, the instruction has to be present in the main memory and all the three memory region addresses A, B, C has to be present in the memory. So only after verifying this, the execution will be started, so that we don't have to reverse anything. So that is the first idea. Ensure that you have got everything needed for the execution already in the memory, else you don't commence the execution. And the second solution is usage of temporary registers to hold the values of the overwritten locations. So if at all you have to reverse the activity, you just use the backup. That is, you have used some temporary registers which are holding the original values. So you can restore the older values with the help of the registers. That is the second option. So basically paging is added between the CPU and the memory. which is transferent to the user process. So all that we are discussing happening at the OS level, nothing is visible to the user process level. And there is a concept called copy on write. So copy on write is actually employed under fork system call. So what happens with the fork? So fork is a system call which creates a child process. So whenever a parent invokes a fork system call, it results in creation of a child process. We are very much aware of it. And we also know that the child is a duplicate of the parent. Now the question here is that whether a separate memory address space will be created for the process which will be copied with the content of the parent, or the child process will just be linked to the same memory address of the parent. So that question needs to be answered here. So normally what happens is that the child will get a separate copy of the parent. So normal fork execution will be such that there will be a separate copy created for the child and they will be treated as two separate processes. But this will be wastage of memory because they are going to have the same copy. So what happened after that is that they introduced the concept of copy on write. So under the copy on write, what happens is that initially the parent and child will be sharing the same address space. That is, the content of the parent will be pointed by the child also, and they will be executing the same code. But suddenly when the child attempts to modify the content, when there is a instruction which makes some modification into the content, and by the time a separate copy will be made for the child, and then the modification will happen within the child copy. So it will not affect the parent copy. So this is what referred as copy on write. So when an attempt is made to write by the parent, by the child, a duplicate copy is made. Otherwise, they will be sharing the same content. And this is a common technique followed by several operating systems including Windows, Linux and Solaris. And whenever you are going to create a child process suddenly, obviously you need memory. So that for that there is a memory, we know how to find the memory space. So it may need some page replacement also. And there is a technique called zero fill on demand that is generally employed for this particular situation. So the idea or the meaning of zero fill on demand is that, see, for example, when a normal page replacement takes place, the victim page has to be copied into the disk before it gets overwritten by the other page. So if a page has to be brought in from disk into main memory and there is no frame left in the main memory, it will need some replacement, and the replaced page has to be properly copied back into the disk before you allow the new page to be written there. That's an obvious requirement, and that is going to take some time. But under zero fill on demand, the operating system will keep ready some frames. That means that it would have already copied the content of those frames those frames into the disk memory, and so that as soon as the child has to be created a duplicate, immediately it can start overwriting that particular memory space. This is called zeroed in fill on demand. So that means that the frames have already been zeroed out by erasing the previous contents. And there is an interesting variation of fork called vfork. So I am going to tell you the difference between fork and vfork. Basically they both perform the same task, that is creation of the child process. But in what way they differ is that in fork system call, the child and parent will be sharing the separate having separate memory space. So that is what we have seen, that normally the fork will have separate address space for parent and child. Whereas in vfork, what happens is that the same memory address space will be shared by the parent and child. And remember that in fork, as long as there is no modification attempted, they will share the same. But when the modification is required by the child, they will be getting separate copies. But with vfork, they will continue to have the same address space irrespective of whether modification is happening or not. So the same address space will be shared by both the parent and child, which means that it is highly memory efficient. You don't spend more memory for processes. But what happens when the child modifies? The modification will be seen by the parent process. So there is no effort made to hide the modification from the parent. The parent will also get to see the modification, and that is how the V-fork works. So you would have understood the difference between fork and V-fork. And with this I am concluding that initial discussion on virtual memory. So we discussed about the need of virtual memory, the benefit of virtual memory, how virtual memory is managed by the operating system, and also different aspects of the fork and V-fork. Thank you.